Okay, with this video, we're going to basically be going over why nationalists tend to reject the idea of the idea of facts and peer-reviewed articles. And we're going to be going over this because it's a very, very important idea. And it also goes into why they also reject this idea of news coverage as well, because it really goes into, because that's usually how people usually get access to these items. And we're going into why they're doing this and why they would rather go into the idea of why they would rather consume what would be considered as opinion rather than actual factual reporting and getting these things that were actually directly peer-reviewed items. And this have actually been verified. And this really goes into a very, very simple idea that what ends up happening is it comes down to their ideology. Now, the ideology of nationalism is basically anything that would go against their worldview is, regardless if it's a fact or not, with it must be considered the enemy. Now, what nationalist leaders do, and this has been historical going on back to Adolf Hitler, who is probably the first and most well-known nationalist, is the idea is to reject the media and to reject common ideas of facts. Now, if you can get the people to reject the common ideas of facts, you can actually get them to fully adopt something and reject the actual natural world around them. And this is the whole idea behind it. If you can get them to accept the reality that really isn't there and accept your reality, you can you can essentially brainwash them to ignore what's in the idea of self-interest and get them to go against this and basically follow you step by step and basically ignore everything in a way that they can ignore, accepting things for them to think for themselves. And that's where you get some people going against what's best for them, and it gets them accepting a lot of very, very poor ideas. And we'll see this in a lot of branding language, in a lot of buzzwords. They'll try to brand a lot of they'll try to brand news as being either from saying all news is from a liberal bias, uh, or meanwhile them themselves with it are not actually conservatives themselves. Mind you, that what it calls nationalists are neither conservative nor liberal. They're actually fall in the quadrant of authoritarian. This is a major point to note, that they're not actually conservatives. They tend to want to run under the under conservative parties. They're actually not conservative whatsoever. They're actually economically liberal and they're socially conservative, but this is because they merely want to control people's ability to exercise their own personal liberty. They don't want personal liberty because this goes against them being able to control the people. This is how an authoritarian works. They tend to be very, very closely related to socialists and communists in this very, very similar way with it, whereas socialists tend to basically be a little bit more working toward more on the idea of equality on that with it, where they basically promise everybody of some type of equality with it, but it tends to be very, very little equality where you're fighting over very, very little at the end. In this case with it, it's basically what you're doing is and where socialism and communism are basically, you're dividing amongst people on an economic level with it. This is you're dividing people amongst uh, an ethnic level, and it's getting people to fight basically on your country of origin, and it's getting people to, and the idea is getting people to have a much more narrow view of the world. And the only way to do this is to basically limit their scope of what they're actually viewing as information. This can only happen by actually tending to demean every bit of news beyond what you view as positive news for your world viewpoint. And if you're doing this, basically what you would do is you would demean anything that's factual news beyond stuff that's positive for you, and you would basically go against that with anything that's negative for you as calling it out as quote unquote fake news. And this is something in which you would find people doing this for the sole purpose of trying to create an ideology that's against your actual thought process. They would be going for the purpose of trying to create an agenda. Now, we've found it even going as far to as trying to create this thing of even going against the science on vaccines. We've even seen them go even as bringing psychologists and psychiatrists that are merely just basically political operatives to basically go against vaccines. And we've gotten them, they've gotten these people to try to push these perspectives to go against actual to go against the vaccine. Meanwhile, these people do not have any knowledge in virology. They're not internists. They're not actual doctors that know how these things work within the body. And it's gotten to be a point to where it's kind of laughable to where these people are actually doing things that are actually quite destructive, being actually damaging to the actual discussion of the discussion of actual policy. We should actually only discuss policy based on actual peer-reviewed items and actual facts. It should not be based on opinion. And we're getting people that are thinking that these are people that are actually legitimate into the they should be legitimate into peer-reviewed items into these discussions that are talking about things that do not work. That the statements that they stated work actually on actual cures, such as hydroxychloroquine, such as things like the ivermectin. These things they've actually found do not work actually at all unless they're actually in lethal amounts in the human body. This is actually simple ideas of actually looking at the actual data. We know this because we've actually examined the actual data of the actual stuff with it when it comes down to the actual information. When we start to look at these things, we know that the actual data out there is showing that they cannot, the body can't handle these dosages, and these dosages were merely in petri dishes. They cannot, the body can't handle these dosages, and these dosages were merely in petri dishes. When it comes to both, where they would actually be in the human body, these things are nothing but placebo. And doing this is basically doing nothing. Well, there's question marks on the ideas of zithromycin, if that would help for at all with it. There could be questions on each doctor saying how it would impact the body when it comes to that with it. Some people say it works positively because it's going to limit the ability for the body to pick up additional bacterial infections. Other people say they don't want the body to build an immunity where it's going to basically say where the it's no longer going to be effective against. So there is a little bit of a debate on that issue, but that's basically. But overall, when you're talking about zithromycin, which is Z-Pak, it does not work actually itself against COVID-19. It's actually merely as a preventative, so you don't get any additional infections while you actually have COVID-19. It does not help you in any such way. When it comes down to these things for aiding in immunity, such as vitamin C or zinc, these things are merely just to help with immunity response, and they do not they will not do anything in to aid in the actual cure. They actually just do very, very little when it comes down to the thing. It just basically helps you kind of get through. It might be helping in minor infections, but very, very little. It more helps for the body in in a general, in what would be viewed as a general overview of infection. This is the whole point. And that's why when we start to view these things, we need to view them not as an actual point of what infections are doing, but more what the actual ideal of how do we actually keep our body in better shape. And that's why regular amounts of vitamin C and zinc are actually good for the body. The other cures, such as like silver actually blocks the pores. So when you actually get a bacterial infection and have to take an antibiotic, that actually hurts the actual ability for antibiotics to actually work. So actually, silver is actually very, very harmful to the body. Silver is not helpful to the body whatsoever. This is actually a snake oil solution. When they're trying to do these other ones like this, do not buy it one bit. And what we're finding these other people that are proclaiming that they're being able to do this. We're finding people that are basically psychologists or psychiatrists out there with it. You got to do your research with it. Number one, Gina Loudon's try to do this. Number two is what's the other one? Number two is Ruby Jane is another one that's out there that's a psychiatrist that's trying to go out there. These people are not are not actual medical doctors and what you would perceive as someone that would be able to have knowledge on COVID. These are not people. These are not internists. These are not virologists. These are not people that have any knowledge on the actual COVID vaccine. These are people that basically deal with mental health issues. And frankly, with it, they're not even that good at that, because all they're doing is they're acting as political operatives. They're not doing any help whatsoever. Frankly, with it, Ruby Jane is not even doing anything with that, and her expertise seems to be more in the idea of basically pricing for drugs. That's it. She's not exactly knowledgeable when it comes to the actual idea of actually practicing mental health on people. So she can't even do that one right. So when it comes down to it, is you should not be trusting these people that are actually putting out these conspiracy theories out there. And that's what's happening. And these were what these nationalists are relying upon. And they're relying upon people who basically are putting up statements that are not peer-reviewed. And there's a reason why you want peer-reviewed stuff, but this means it was actually verified. Anything out there with it, if you're not getting something that's verified, it's basically considered as false information. And what's happening is these nationalists are basically saying, well, I heard someone stated, so it must be true. Now, number one, they're getting it from their friends on Facebook, which they're thinking just because they stated it, it must be true. Most of these people do not have any, they've never even read any medical journals throughout any of their life. They never even had any type of, basically any interest in any type of medical information, or potentially even any family that's even had any medical training. So they're getting information from these people that have no knowledge. They're basically pretty much people that probably have not even gone to a doctor in a decade. And then you have the next one, which is people who are basically basically very, very who are basically going against the actual who maybe have some medical training, but who are actually going against all peer-reviewed information because they're trying to basically die on an actual partisan hill. They're actually going against all self-interest and actually all medical data just to die on a medical hill. I'm not saying you have to agree with Fauci at all. There's plenty of other people other than Fauci out there that are basically telling you, get the vaccine, get the vaccine, get the vaccine, get the vaccine. And there's other reasons to wear a mask other than actually about COVID-19. You have allergy season out there with it. These, what it called, the masks protect very, very well against allergies. Trust me. Because of COVID-19, because of the season, there's actually been not enough people to actually process the actual trees that are in public areas. This causes a lot of pollen to go around. I wear a mask specifically because this limits my ability to be exposed to allergens because of those trees. And this actually helps me from actually having to go to the local clinic to actually go in, or the doctor to go in, because I have an upper respiratory infection because of this as a factor, because they're not having as many people work on the trees because they have a limited workforce because of COVID-19. And COVID-19 is not some fake conspiracy or some conspiracy to take out Republicans. And if you think it's what it called meant to take out Republicans, that should be more of an interest to actually get the vaccine. This is the whole thing that it boils down to. This is not something created by Democrats. This is not some biological weapon. They've gone over all the data. This is basically going out there with all these type of fake stories. They've gone and tried to break it down. This is naturally occurring, and it just happens to be that it's likely that it came out from rats, because even though they kept trying to basically say, oh, it's likely from bats, it's likely from bats, it's likely from bats. Well, the fact is COVID can easily be transmitted from rats to humans. It's not that hard. And being that they have several different species of rat in China, including different ones that live in rice fields, as well as the brown rat, which is international. It actually originated out of Europe. And if you want to blame anybody for the brown rat, you can blame Europeans with it, which obviously these nationalists don't want to do that, because those are white people that they don't want to blame. And that was from what are called white people actually exporting the brown rat that actually caused that. That's actually and the brown rat is actually the cause of pretty much every plague known to man, and that's actually from from the Europeans exporting it. When it comes down to these things, that's actually how these things happen. And we can, if they want to go in that direction with it, that's likely the culprit, and that's where they're thinking that this actually came from. and that's actually one of the things that's likely where this became an easy thing to spread. And it's not hard to spread it from rats to humans. That's one of the very common things. It's not just bats. And this is something in which, because there's been, because of the nationalism going out, because there was so much hatred of China, because of Trump's trade war, we had that going on. And this is something which was muddying all of the waters on the actual studies of what could have actually gone on if it was actually China at all with it. Who knows where it came from? Because there's nothing that actually states that it could have come from China at all. Because no one knows, because in many cases it can take. And when you start getting such an ideology that wants to block facts, that wants to block peer-reviewed items, and basically wants to create their own reality, this is where you get these problems that come from. And it just comes from that with it. And because they want their own reality, they want this idea that says their people are the greatest and everything out is the enemy. Everything out must be the enemy unless they adhere to that ideology. And that's the whole point. They want this ideology that a one ethnic group is superior to an actual multicultural system, and they wanted to create this this myth with it, and they've even wanted to go as far as to rewrite history with this whole idea. And we're finding that nationalists are doing this across the country, that they want to create this myth in history that we actually have that the U.S. used to be some type of white nation. We never were. In fact, the U.S. has always been multi-ethnic from the start. Some of the earliest slave owners were actually black. So even when we go to that, even some of the earliest, and they were also obviously had to be landowners, which means that basically we were not even founded as an actual white nation. Even what they want to have as an Anglo-American country, was not even true. We still had Native Americans, we had Mexicans here, we had the actual Spanish here. There were basically, and French, that came in from both down from Canada, as well as the Spanish came in from Spain. We've had the Creole people as well, and and very, very early in our system with it, we had the Chinese come over to help us build the railroad system. So it was not abnormal to actually see that we were actually a multicultural system, and the Chinese came over before we actually had the actual big run of European immigrants. So they actually came over before a big flood of European immigrants. And this whole idea of anti-immigrant legislation was actually due to the Chinese being too efficient in their working. It was the first thing of actual protectionism, and actually if we look at it, it wasn't even constitutional. They actually let it slide, even though it wasn't even constitutional. This is basically what all of our anti-immigration legislation is about. If you actually remove that, and if you actually look at the Constitution itself, there's nothing constitutional about stopping immigrants from coming here. The only power the government has is over naturalization, nothing over immigration. And when we start to view this idea of nationalism is not actually consistent with the Constitution. It's actually completely against the Constitution. So those who say they support the Constitution yet are nationalists, that's complete polar opposites. And when we find this, we find that basically these people are complete contradictions of themselves. And this is why they don't want to basically look. This is part of the reason why we find that these people don't want to basically look into the ideas of both of facts and peer-reviewed articles on things, because when we start to see this, they will see the fact is their whole worldview starts collapsing upon itself, because the ideas is the country is not what they actually think it is. The country is far different than what they view it is. And it's not this idea of what they believe the nation is. They believe it's some type of mono-ethnic libertine society that allows them to do whatever they want, and they can restrict people who don't look like them. That's not what it is. It's completely different. And it's actually freedom with responsibility, and that basically anybody can come here as long as they understand freedom with responsibility. And that's basically the whole concept. And there's no restrictions to it. There's no restrictions to coming in. Obviously, there's certain restrictions to becoming a citizen, but that's basically it. And this is why when we look at the idea of the rejection of facts and pure...
All right, come here. I'm just going to take her out to get her to poop for you.
And peer-reviewed articles, we understand why they do this. They can't accept the actual ideas of facts because their whole worldview collapses. It ends up being why any authoritarian ideology collapses under its own weight, and why they don't want this to happen, which is why some level of censorship happens under all styles of authoritarian ideologies. You need censorship, otherwise you're going to actually fail. Obviously, we're finding in communism and socialism, you're going to have censorship of access to information, whereas in nationalism, what they try to do is they try to demean the ideas of what are viewed as facts, what are viewed as peer-reviewed articles, what are viewed as the media. They don't want any of this to actually be viewed as being legitimate. So this is their way of basically saying, don't believe any of this. Believe what the government is telling you as fact. Now, it's not all the government. It's only these nationalists who tell you this. Only believe what nationalists tell you, and the other nationalists tell you with it. Believe what nationalist politicians tell you. This is the truth. Believe what the government tells you. They're telling you the truth. Do not believe anything outside of what we tell you, and that's because you're being fed lies. And this is the whole kind of point of what they run. And this is something in which you're going to find in which they do. And any person should find that as being very, very scary, as it's really no different than what you're finding out in China, what you're finding in North Korea, because it's the same thing. This is something in which you're finding is the same story. The reason why is because they don't want an actual opposition to their restriction of facts. They know that if they had a restriction of, they know if they didn't have restriction of facts, that people could get their information anywhere. They can actually challenge the actual official story of the government, and that people start calling out the government as a bunch of BS. And that's where the actual problem exists. And what ends up happening is if you get the government to start to open up and start to actually change from being authoritarian, even slightly with it, you get these people that are basically that start to freak out and they will start to become violent, as we saw on January 6th, and as you started seeing with these people threatening violence. Because the fact is, they know nothing but they know nothing but authoritarian, their authoritarian system. They don't know any better because they've been indoctrinated into this system. So when even you get them the most mild freedom outside of that, they have no idea what to do. So these people act out, and they go, "Oh, we can't accept this. We want to go back to this, to our ideas of censorship. We want the media to be attacked. We want all this censorship. We want to be told what to do." From our dear nationalist leaders. And anybody who basically isn't within this thing with it, we're not going to believe them. And this is what ends up happening. And even if dear nationalist leaders tell us a different story, we're not going to believe it. And this is where we've gotten at. And we've seen this because because even when we get the actual facts with it, they're willing to actually change the actual subject and actually declare what's up is down, what's left is right, what's right is wrong, and they're willing to actually change the actual story and actually take the actual outcome. Take, for instance, the Arizona audit. Those results were leaked. The actual results showed that actually they counted too many votes for Trump, and they took votes away from Biden. Now, me myself, I'm a libertarian. I voted for Jorgensen, so I do not have a dog in the fight with that. But this shows that basically they favored Trump in the election, and they took votes away from Biden when they initially did. It shows it shows when they did the actual recount. Now, this was actually done by someone who was pushing conspiracy theories for Trump, and the end result was that it shows that the actual in Arizona that Arizona actually made errors, and it actually gave over a couple hundred votes back to Joe Biden. Now, what does Trump get out there when he actually does a speech out in Georgia? He actually says the exact opposite, and he proclaims that he actually won the audit, and says there's some type of fake news going on in the reporting. Meanwhile, all they did was report numbers. All they're doing is reporting numbers. They said, here was the original thing, here was the outcome. That's all they reported. They didn't report anything new. What does he do? He goes, "Oh, they must be fake with it." And the people buy everything he's saying with it because he's demeaning the media, and he's saying these are the new results. I must be declared the winner with it because I say so. And this is what ends up happening in nationalism, because you're not allowed to listen to anybody but the actual nationalist government people telling you what the story is. Anybody outside of that is supposed to be considered a liar, even if all they're doing is they're giving you the actual primary source results or peer-reviewed results. They could be giving you all of those things with peer-reviewed facts or primary source results with it, which means directly from basically the horse's part of the saying with it, but directly from the horse's mouth. You can get it directly from the horse's mouth, and and they won't believe it. And this is what ends up these are very, very bad. And it's why when they start to see they're not being able to distinguish like opinion from actual fact, because they're being told facts are wrong because they don't align with this ideology, because they've been told for 5 years facts are wrong because they don't match up with it. I mean, they're being fed basically a steady diet of garbage. I mean, complete and utter nonsense and garbage. And the best that they're getting is anecdotal stories and being told, oh, these are facts with it, and then when they actually get basically brought out actual factual evidence of actual numbers, there's being so no, those must be false. Those are fake. That's fake news. And that this is what they're being told with it to respond back with, because anything that doesn't fit to their actual ideology, because they could see one story of like one immigrant who may kill a citizen. But the fact is with it is when you look at the actual stories of actual immigrants and immigrant murder numbers next to actual citizen murder numbers, it actually shows that they're far lower. And there's a reason why, because the fact is it doesn't matter if you're legal or illegal with it, they know that there's a microscope on you. So they're not going to be committing murders. But when it comes to the actual citizens, they're far higher. In fact, when we actually look at based by race, even if you're immigrant or not, they find that when they try to look at Hispanics are merely equal with whites. So there is no actual risk on Hispanics. When we look at groups like Middle Easterners or Asians or all these other, or Native Americans, groups like this with it, they're the highest levels that we've ever seen with it are no more than half as likely to commit homicide than whites. So this means that basically that your risk to actually get killed by a white would be twice as likely to be killed by a white than you would by these groups that they're supposedly fearful of. These people that are likely immigrants with it, they're going to come in here with it. And they also use these excuses, oh, but immigrants are going to come here and take my job. Well, that means you're less qualified. If immigrants are here going to take your job, this means merely you're less qualified. It means either A, you're charging too much for your skill set, or B, you're far less qualified for the job. And if you say that an immigrant that can't speak the language is coming over here in nothing but tattered fishing shorts, and broken flip-flops is taking your job, it means you do not deserve to work there anyhow with it, because if they could merely just give a few hand motions for them to do the job with it, it means you had no business working there because you have no skills whatsoever. And these things that nationalists are trying to say, oh, but they're going to take my job with it. Yeah, they do with it. They sure as hell deserve it more than you do, because if they're willing to cross the damn desert to actually work here and work their butt off with it, I can guarantee, because we know they're going to come up here and work their butt off. We know they're more deserving than you are with it, because you think it's an actual right for a job. They came crossing a desert for a job. Who do you think's going to work harder? The one crossing a desert, or the one who thinks they're right? It's going to be the one who could cross the desert for the job. That's why the idea of nationalism is a failed ideology and shouldn't even be given any type of consideration. This is the idea of why we should have open borders. Open borders means we're going to have more immigrants coming in here, working harder, and actually creating more jobs with it. When we've looked at the data, we show that they are actually the job creators. People here who are born here naturally are not creating jobs. They're not creating anything. They're merely being a drain on the economy. This is why the United States is falling behind. It's not because of immigrants. Immigrants are the only thing that are holding up the economy. Because we knew that because if this were the case with it, the actual tax relief would have actually created real growth. How come the actual growth under Donald Trump with his protectionism was actually 3/4 of that of Barack Obama? If protectionism actually worked, It should have actually boomed under Barack Obama. This is something that if nationalism actually worked, we should have seen an actual boom under Trump for real growth, not see it go down to 3/4 of that, and that was before the coronavirus hit. Mind you, this is going up only through the end of 2019. This is before the coronavirus actually hit the United States shores, according to the actual data that we have. And this means this means that basically even up to that point, his actual real growth was far less than actually Barack Obama, who he complained about for actually stifling growth. And it shows that protectionism actually harms growth. It doesn't help growth. Going against trade, going against free trade, and going against immigration kills growth. It murders it. You actually want that. That's what actually creates growth. He was also the worst president to date for debt to the economy. When people try to say, oh, but we're worried about the debt with it. Well, you should have been worried with it under Donald Trump, because you're not going to get any debt savings under Democrats, frankly. And if you're that worried about debt under Barack Obama, you should have you shouldn't have basically got a guy who added the same exact amount of debt in 4 years. He pretty much per year was adding double the debt of Barack Obama. This is not somebody who is actually fiscally responsible. He was the most fiscally irresponsible. Now his excuse was, "Oh, we'll basically renegotiate debt." Frankly, that's not how public debt works, which shows you he did not understand how public debt works. That's not how this thing works. When you're that far in debt, you have no ability to do that, because you have no assets to work with. Unless you're willing to actually sell off actual assets, which are basically owned by private citizens, which would basically be going flat out to communism, you have no ability to do that. And which shows you that he was not a person who believed in anything of small government. He believed in big government. And for those who want to complain about Biden with it, Biden is far more of a small government president than Trump would ever be. You might complain about his spending with it, but he's far more small government than Trump would ever be, because Trump doesn't believe in the ideas of actually private property. He never has believed in it except for his own properties. Every property other than his own, he believes is public property. If you look at the way he's acted in the courts, he's treated it as public property, and he believes he should be able to take it. So when it comes down to nationalism, he believes that basically anything that isn't his he should be able to go to the courts and take it. So when it comes down to nationalism, that it shouldn't be a surprise that basically it's all about a road to serfdom, and basically having the government take over everything you own. And which is why we end up seeing the eventual government centralization of everything. We've seen it with everything, when they want to basically punish people for not supporting them. They basically centralize everything, and they take it from you to basically punish you when it's an actual private owned good. And this is the idea of nationalism. And we've seen it being done here with it. We saw it being done under Marcos in the Philippines. He basically centralized rice, knowing that it would harm the people, And we saw Trump doing it with a lot of different disinfectants and things like masks and other goods in the United States. He was doing this even from hospitals to basically punish people for dare not supporting him during the election cycle, and do this to basically punish them. And that's all what nationalism is about. And it's why it goes on with obviously trying to get the people not to believe in any facts out there, because when they start to see how authoritarian it is and how it's only about to strip you of every bit of personal liberty and every bit of economic liberty, in the end, you'll see that basically it's basically nothing but a cousin of both communism and socialism. And that's the whole point. And that's why they do this thing with this. There's a reason why nationalism does this. Now, the problem is that the whole idea is that basically is when they do this is to create a situation in which people are not ableism, and they'll end up using all the words globalists. Basically, they'll use the word trying to claim that they're a Democrat and all these other words. They want to do all those type of things with it. But it's basically meant to ostracize them with it as some and all it is basically a witch hunt. It's basically a witch hunt to basically eliminate all of the people who aren't loyal to the king. Essentially, it's basically meant run no different than like a monarchy, and it's no different than that, or like the Spanish Inquisition. This is the whole idea of what this is for. And it's basically to punish those who would dare speak ill will against the ideology, where the actual dogma means more than the actual speaking truth to power. And speaking truth to power is merely just stating the actual facts. You can say the sky is blue and what it called, and they would basically be out there and say burn them. And that's what would go on in the eyes of nationalism, and that's the problem with these authoritarian ideologies, and that's the whole issue. Now, I'm just going to end it here because I think I've gone over all of the issues that have actually gone on, and that's about it. And bye, everyone.